like to see what the latest ideas are floating around.
Great. And I invited Mark because, well, actually, he is the legacy of the liberty movement here in Hawaii. I mean, when I first came here to Hawaii, he had long before me had started off with the liberty movement, the Libertarian Party, when it was originating. He'll let you know exactly the dates of that. And he's been close to it over the years, and I think he has probably some of the best insight. I worked with you on some articles for when we were working with UH publication.
With Ted Becker?
Yeah. And so I thought there's nobody better to give an overall perspective where the liberty movement has been, where it is now, and maybe where it's going. And so won't you welcome Mark Coleman.
Thank you. I guess I should stand, not sure.
Wow.
Okay. Well, it's the topic, of course, was past and future of the liberty movement, lessons I've learned, and a little bit about myself to give you an idea of the experience I'm talking from. I've been in Hawaii since I was in kindergarten, so I'm longtime Hawaii resident. I just qualified for Social Security retirement, so that gives you an idea of how old I am. I was at the Star-Advertiser for 27 years until a year ago, almost exactly today, starting when it was the Star Bulletin. Before that, I'd worked for Pacific Business News 10 years. You all might have seen this in the little bio that was provided. And I worked on Guam for 2 years, so I'm real sensitive to that colonialist sense that people on islands like Guam and Puerto Rico must have actually, and even here. And I've been around. I lived in England for a year, and I graduated from Florida State University in the early 70s, and was born in Okinawa, lived in Japan till I was about 4. So growing up, I had the benefit of having 2 very political parents. My father especially, but my mother also. When I was growing up out on Portlock Road, before there was a Hawaii Kai, my dad and my mother were both very involved in the Republican Party. They were instrumental in capturing the local Republican Party with a real good cadre of friends to be for Goldwater in 1964 against the more establishment. Rockefeller, I think, was the main opposition in that year. And there's a fascinating article by Chuck Frankel that I came across recently that talked about exactly how they did that, precinct by precinct throughout the state. Got every precinct to go for Goldwater, and Hawaii was the Republican Party of Hawaii in 1964. He went to the Cow Palace, and they cast their vote for Barry Goldwater, who was a proto-libertarian. He was very had a very sort of anti-communist foreign policy, which on one level made a lot of sense. But he also had a lot of great domestic libertarian ideas. And in our bookshelves growing up, I saw copies of things like Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and For a New Intellectual, and Anthem by Ayn Rand, and Planning for Freedom by von Mises, and Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. And these were all great books, and a lot of books by Leonard Read of the Foundation for Economic Education. One of the favorite of which by him for me throughout my whole life has been one that he called Students of Liberty. And then we moved to England, and me and my father, and it was very height of the Vietnam War, and I was an American, and we were the bad guys in England, and most Europeans didn't really appreciate America's role in Vietnam, and I did at the time. I thought it was the right thing to do, but I had grown up in a very anti-communist household. People who thought that fighting the Red Menace was the way to go. But slowly through the years, especially once I got to college, and actually, I was a voracious reader, all those books and all the books that those led me to. became a libertarian. I gradually, logically went past where my father and my mother were. They were good Republicans. Economic freedom was a truth for them. But as you know, most Republicans kind of trip on the foreign policy issues, and they have never really come around as being very good on personal freedom issues. Economic freedom is a personal freedom, but you know what I mean when I say that. I mean like the drug war and prostitution and other moral turpitude type of things. So I gradually, in fact, I had this compulsion to speak out. And so when I was at Florida State University, I got a column. I had a regular opinion column in the student university newspaper called Exoterically Speaking, because I didn't want to be talking to esoterically. I wanted to be speaking to the broad public. And as a libertarian, I certainly was in a minority, but I did feel that libertarianism is the best of what we know to be the extremes of left and right. You know, Republicans and Democrats, or conservatives, liberals. We're taking the best of both worlds. We always have. And so I liked to think that I was talking, and I could switch, you know, depending on the issues. And I'll get into a little bit about, those are some of the lessons I've learned. Also at Florida State, I was chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom. I don't think it exists anymore. It's now something like, I don't know what it's called now, but that was the youth activist group on the right, quote unquote, the right. And they were very pro-freedom, except on foreign policy, which was a problem, except they would never come out and say, even marijuana should be legalized. It was a lot of social conservatism back then that made it tough to be a libertarian. And I had long hair back then, so it was quite a world. Then, however, in fact, I got our chapter of Young Americans for Freedom. We had a really good group of people. We got our chapter to go to the convention, and our chapter endorsed legalizing marijuana. And we went to the national convention in Houston that year.
Convention of Republicans?
The Young Americans for Freedom.
Oh, yeah.
Young Americans for Freedom, by the way, was Bill Buckley, helped found that group. And my father had been chairman of that group here in Hawaii in the 60s. They're very famous in the history of the Libertarian Party movement. That's where they had a big division in like 1968. A lot of key people broke away. It was very, within the Libertarian movement, it was a big deal. Within the conservative movement, because YAF supported the draft. And if you're a libertarian, you can't be supporting the draft. You can't be supporting military interventionism willy-nilly. It's more about self-defense. So anyway, I moved out of YAF because that was obviously not going to ever be a libertarian group, and I went to this group called New Right Coalition, founded by a guy named Don Fetter, who was an Ayn Randian objectivist. By the way, my parents also had books like Atlas Shrugged. Oh, I mentioned Ayn Rand, right? I never read Atlas Shrugged until years and years later. It turned out to be an awesome book, but it wasn't critical to my formation of my thinking like it seemed to be for a lot of libertarians. And it was actually one of the first fiction books that I actually really enjoyed. I never usually read fiction. When I did, it was usually science fiction, like Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. Practical things, sort of practical fiction that had ideological themes. It was really fun. But I went to New Right Coalition, and they had so many cool posters. We used to go out at night on campus, and these were kind of in-your-face kind of posters. Come on, get a piece of what somebody else earned. Join the socialist parasite revolution. And one of our main opponents on campus was a group called Young Socialist Alliance. And they were good, well-meaning people, but they were wrong. And here's another one, your money and your life. We used to slap these up on the walls against the IRS. And we had the key, of course, that tripped out a lot of libertarians was when, in fact, it led to the formation of the Libertarian Party, was when Nixon declared wage and price controls and outlawed, and when he declared wage and price controls. And NRC, New Right Coalition, had a great poster of him dressed up like Hitler, and it was all about fighting that whole attitude. We were in Florida, so Liberate Cuba was kind of a popular one,
Isn't that interventionist?
Yes, that would be considered interventionist, and actually that was one of the problems with New Right Coalition. They were still, like Ayn Rand, who was really dismissive of the Libertarian Party. They still were very interventionist in terms of foreign policy. Here they are, they're going after Mao Zedong, and America's phony peace movement. They were this kind of stuff started to turn me off after a while, but here was vote socialist.
When you show them around to both sides.
Yeah.
Sorry. He's an early pioneer of memes.
Vote socialist. Sorry, man.
Who is that?
That's McGovern and Nixon. So it was like,
They're a team.
yeah, and this was the year.
72.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that was the first year we had John Hosper. So anyway, I went from New Right Coalition to a group called Society for Individual Liberty, which was Sheldon Richman and a number of actual libertarians who were inspired by Rothbard and the Misesian tradition, of thinking about, especially Murray Rothbard, and that I really resonated with, and I realized I couldn't be voting for either any Republican in political races or any Democrats, of course. So through the grapevine, as small as it was back then, it was really hard to find good books. I used to go to the used bookstore in Tallahassee looking for anything by Rothbard or Hayek or Mises, and they were really hard to find unless, there was a couple of small publishing houses like Arlington House where they would publish a book by von Mises, Human Action or whatever. So I saw this notice somewhere about people were going to be forming the Libertarian Party, and it was David Nolan, an advertising executive in Colorado, I think, and David Berglund and a few other people. So I signed up and I became the Southeast coordinator for the Libertarian Party's formative year. This was 1972, maybe late 71 through early 1972. I found every libertarian I could throughout the Southeast, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and I actually went with my wife and I met up with my brother in Denver, Colorado in June 72, where they had their founding convention. I was a delegate. I was also on the platform committee, and it was really exciting times. Not to mention that the Rolling Stones were staying on the top floor because they were of this. I think it was the Hilton or the Sheraton, the Denver Sheraton, and they were staying upstairs, and it was the Playboy Club was up there or something was up there. But we ran into them in the elevator. That was pretty cool. But it was really exciting times, and they were trying really hard. I was still actually not a non-interventionist abroad, and so they were trying to accommodate conservatives who were there, as well as hardcore libertarian anti-war people on libertarian principles. So I eventually grew out of that, became a full-on libertarian, non-interventionist foreign policy. But after I was at that convention, we set up the party. We had a candidate, John Hospers, who was chairman of the philosophy department at University of Southern California, I believe it was. I got to meet him. He signed my book, which was a brand new book by a major publishing house called Libertarianism, a philosophy whose time has come, or something like that. And he signed it for me. He was a real nice guy. He was on the ballot in 2 states, 1 or just 2 states. And in Florida, to vote for him, you had to sign the names of all 32 electors on the ballot. supposedly, as I recall. I could be wrong, but I had to send that list out to everyone I knew that might vote for him. Well, he got a small percentage of votes in 1 or 2 states, and also his running mate was Toni Nathan, a woman, also an advertising executive. She was awesome. She was a real firecracker, and she became the first woman in U.S. history to get an electoral college vote as a vice presidential candidate. Because Roger McBride, who several years later became a Libertarian Party candidate for president, he was a Republican elector that year, and he couldn't vote. He couldn't vote for Nixon, so he broke ranks and he voted for John Hospers and Toni Nathan. So that was all something to be very proud of. Meanwhile, I'm finishing up my degree at Florida State University, and as soon as I could, I came back home because I'm from Hawaii. I love the surf, I just love island living. Florida was nice, but it ain't Hawaii. So I came back, and I had long hair, a college degree. It was a depression of 74, early 75, I believe, 74, 75. Couldn't get a job. So I went back to Florida for about another 9 months to a year, and worked in cable TV, radio, a weekly newspaper, while I was waiting for a graduate teaching assistantship at UH to come through. So I got that, I came back, and within, a year or two, I was active in the Libertarian Party, and I became state chairman of the Libertarian Party. And there was a moment there, I think, and that's when I met Ken, really, actually, in the early days, in the mid-70s. And it was rough. But, we had some good candidates, some good people. Rockne Johnson, I helped him run for Senate. Ken Schoolin always had something going on as a candidate. And we were getting a lot of publicity. Dale Pratt was the chairman, I think, a woman, chairwoman, but chairman, whatever. And I can't remember if she was before me, but her former husband.
In the 80s. She was chair in the early 80s. After you left.
Yeah, after me.
After you.
So I think I took over from Al Pennington, and whom I considered. He was real low key. The party wasn't going anywhere, and Mike Russell was helping him a lot too. Michael Russell was a chairman at one point too. Michael was very much a promoter. I really liked him. He had a lot of energy, and he's still around. Haven't seen him in a long time. But when I was in the
twist his arm to come to the convention.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I was chairman, I was really trying to keep the party alive, and we were the third party. We had been out there collecting signatures, a lot of work. Managed to keep it on the ballot. I remember Bruce Anderson and I trotting down to the legislature to encourage the representatives and senators to keep it easy for us to stay on the ballot, if not make it easier. Cayetano actually was really open to us. He really liked the idea of the Libertarian Party being on the ballot. And there was one meeting where I was just like, I said, you guys, you all got to come, or we're going to have to hang it up. We don't have enough money, we don't have enough people. That was one of our best attended meetings. Cliff Slater showed up, a lot of people showed up. And then I got my master's degree, and I had to cut my hair. I didn't have to, but to get a job, I cut my hair, and I kind of put my resume out there like, look, I can do anything in the communications field. My degree was communications. I can write, I can work for radio, TV, advertising, whatever you want. Whoever gets me first, you can have me. And I pulled all my strings about my dad, my mom, and my stepfather, and my father-in-law was actually a photographer at the Star Bulletin. And I knew John Simons, who was the managing editor or executive editor at the time at the Bulletin, because I had gone in many times to drop off press releases for the Libertarian Party. So he knew me as a bright young kid, and he liked my spunk, I guess, and he knew my father, who used to write classical music reviews, 900 columns through the years for the Star-Advertiser as a classical reviewer, worked for the symphony and for the political background that he had. And so he took a chance on me. He says, well, I can hire you. You have to go to Guam for 2 years, and then we'll try to bring you back. But you're going to have to give up the political stuff. You know, you can't be a journalist and be out and out a member of the Libertarian Party.
Those were the good old days.
Oh, it was Dave Dengler, by the way. It was Dave Dengler who was the chairman at that time when I got that job to go to Guam. So I had to back off on the Libertarian Party for a long time, it turned out, because that was my career, being a journalist. And journalists professionally are supposed to be objective and not involved in...
When was that?
Well, that's why I said supposed to be.
What year?
And that was always
When did you start? Like 85, yeah?
I started in Guam in early '78,
Or that early?
and I came back and I started at Pacific Business News in January 1980, and I started at the Star Bulletin in late May 1989, and I just quit the Star-Advertiser a year ago. So I've seen, you know, the paper on Guam was my daily career. I was a business editor. My first foray into daily journalism. PBN was a weekly, but I became essentially the editor through the years. I was running a staff, and I got to help writing editorials. And it was such a pleasure to work for George Mason, because he was, you know, he was the champion for small business around here. And I was working for George. I was he was really open to libertarian ideas, obviously being a businessman, a champion for small business. He was always writing against regulations, excessive taxation, things that were crushing entrepreneurial initiative. And I was saying, oh yeah, we got to privatize everything. You know, and of course he was saying, well, you know, you can't be. That was before the word privatize was even in the dictionary. And I will say this, I was a libertarian before the word libertarian was in common use. Now, you know, it's well used, and privatize is in the dictionary. So I like to think I've been ahead of the curve a little bit on a lot of this stuff. And now, instead of on the ballot in 2 states every year, Libertarian Party is always on the ballot on all 50 states, plus in Guam and Puerto Rico. And our ideas have really permeated the political realm. Now, I was really quickly reviewing the talk that Kali'i Akina gave here in June. I work with Kali'i now with the Grassroot Institute. By the way, when I quit the Star-Advertiser, I went into freelance writing and editing. So I haven't really retired. I have clients. I was building up a portfolio of clients to do writing and editorial for, and one of them was the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii through Joe Kent and Kali'i Akina, who's the president, because obviously I'm very sympathetic with what they do, and it was really a great fit. I've been able to help them with the writing and the editing, and it's been a great fit, and it's becoming more and more of the majority of my time as a freelancer. I'm writer and managing editor now, so it's been great. But Kali'i here, when he was speaking here a few months ago, he was talking about how to win. You know, we must learn how to win, and of course we all want to win with our ideas. And Kali'i made some great points. But it reminds me of a newsletter that we had at the Libertarian Party back in the 70s. And Cliff Slater wrote an article for it. I think maybe it was even the 80s by then, because I volunteered on the newsletter. And it was, libertarians are winning. Our ideas are winning. You don't have to always win at the ballot box to win. It was a Democratic President, Carter, under whom regulatory bureaucrats, particularly Alfred Kahn, I believe it was, deregulated trucking and airlines. That was a Democratic president. It was a Republican president who normalized relations with China, which, you know, instead of treating them like a pariah, that was a good thing. And you have these anomalies that, you know, you never know where the good stuff is going to come from. But basically I'm talking about our ideas, and how even though the libertarians have never won, you know, a seat in Congress that I know of, maybe a House seat in Alaska at one point.
Several. New Hampshire and Alaska.
Okay.
We've had people elected to state legislative seats, but generally in state legislative seats wherein the size of the electorate in that district is smaller than what we have in Hawaii.
Right.
In New Hampshire, I think they have 400 people in a state that's got 500,000.
Right. So my point is, we're winning, and there's reasons for that. This is my observation, through the years. I saw it when it was like the word privatization wasn't even in the dictionary. Libertarians were like, what's that? You had to go around and prove that it was a real word. I swear. And we were groping for groups to be with that were of like-minded people. We had to create our own political party ultimately. And now look at how many websites there are that are libertarian. Back then it was like the Foundation for Economic Education, and that was just about it. There were these other little groups that were more political activist, but FEE was so powerful in putting out good literature. Now there's Foundation for Economic Education. There's a political libertarian think tank in every state practically now, and to the point where they even have a group now called the State Policy Network. I just went with Joe in August, I believe it was, to the very end of August, to Texas. They had an annual meeting there. It was their largest one yet. They had like 1,300 people from around the country there. It was an excellent production, and they had seminars over 3 days talking about how to be more effective getting our views out. Now, as far as that goes, what have I learned? What are the lessons? Well, one of them is be nice. Be nice. It's good to be radical, and when we were in New Right Coalition, and we liked getting in the face, putting up these provocative newsletter posters on the walls and debating, and putting up the table and handing out literature. We were always debating. But what I've learned through the years, partly as a result of being a journalist, and you have to work with people you disagree with. You just get along. There's no point to be effective in alienating yourself from everybody. You want to be nice. How do you be nice? You educate yourself, one thing, so you know what you're talking about. And then you choose your words carefully so that you're not offending people inadvertently. And realize that the reason for being nice is that everybody's human. Everybody has their own dreams and wants to be treated well, be taken seriously. They've got mom and dad, they might not be getting along, but they've got families, they've got jobs, they've got things, they have health problems, they've got bills to pay, they've got their own troubles. We all want to get along. We all pretty much have the same goals, and I believe this is a point von Mises made, which is that, everyone has the same goals. We just have different ideas about how to get there, and that goes back to the ideas. The one thing Kali'i said, and it's very true, is that the virtue of our position and our ideas is that they're right. We're right. Our ideas are not only morally correct, but they're practically correct. They work. That's why free market ideas, the idea of economic freedom, why those ideas have gradually come to be the norm around the world. Communist China is communist in name only. The Soviet Union fell apart. It couldn't sustain. There's a lot of factors in those kinds of things. Even in America, where the trend obviously on a lot of levels seems very disappointing and dire, there are counter trends that you can look through. Cryptocurrency and the web, and there are so many ways that the governments that can be so oppressive, we're just going around them, because that's the reality. It works better. And the only way, so I'd say be nice, educate yourself. If nothing else, educate yourself. Don't worry about trying to change anybody else's minds. Don't worry about debating. Don't get caught in the weeds about the latest scandal in Washington, taking sides about Trump or Hillary. Educate yourself, read the books, read the magazines, go on the website in the morning before you start your day or at night at the end of the day and read our latest articles from the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii and Foundation for Economic Education and Von Mises Institute.
And Jonathan Gullible.
Oh, I was going to say, I have something here that...
It's got the very first edition.
You want to be invited back.
Oh, I was going to
Grab the first
grab it out, yeah. This was Jonathan Gullible.
Mark, I have some of the, I think they're worth $1,000 each.
Yeah, read that, and here's the Robert Heinlein book. It was a classic. It was Anarchism on the Moon, basically, anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah.
And Laneige Chronicles by Paul Wilson, great book, great fiction book, probably his best book. And then I have here, I'll show you real quickly, other books that I enjoy. Oh, that's for you, bud. Lilikoi Jam from my yard, homemade by my wife, Christina. This was a great book, Defending the Undefendable by Robert Bloch. It's so good. He takes all these outlandish examples, things that you would never want to think you could defend, prostitution, libel, Road to Serfdom. Not exactly pure libertarianism, but very good. And then Planning for Freedom, that was the one that got me started on Von Mises, and then there was another one called Anti-Capitalist Mentality, but now I've got them all. Socialism is a really good one by him. Power and Market, this was one I bought in the bookstore in Tallahassee, and of course now it's part of the updated versions of Man, Economy, and State. Ceremonial Chemistry by Thomas Saz. He's the guy that pushed the idea that mental illness is a myth, and he was a psychiatrist. But he also wrote great books about the drug war, which
With
were...
Milton Friedman, right? Didn't I co-write a couple of books?
No, but I did bring Capitalism and the Unknown Idea. Where's that? That's down. That was another book. No? Okay, well, I mean, Capitalism and Freedom was a really good book too, but it was a collection of essays, and the best essay in that book was Occupational Licensure. Friedman, was in the big debate in libertarians. He was always, he favored a central bank, and of course, if you're a true libertarian, you can't favor a central bank because that's a monopoly on the business of money. So that's not very free market at all. I would just, you're giving me the bum rush? Am I going on too long?
Only that we can open up to discussion and so on. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Let me just make a couple more real quick points. I keep saying here, be flexible. When you're talking with people, realize that, we want our discussions to be win-win. Listen to them. Listen to hear what they have to say, and don't fall into any false dichotomies. That's too often in our discussions with friends or in debates, you'll find, especially back in college, you'll find yourself arguing, like, for example, in college, there was a Young Socialist Alliance. He was very infamous, and the state senators had it in for him, and they wanted to ban him from speaking on campus. And actually, they wanted to kick him out because he was a socialist. And what does a libertarian say about that when it's basically a state government university to begin with? Where's the private property principle involved here? And so I just, my attitude was, well, hey, the article I wrote was, well, it's kind of really hard to take sides here because this guy's representing the taxpayers and it's a government university, and if most of them don't want this socialist guy to be speaking here, then, what? It's hard to say. But I said, I welcome the idea, the exchange of ideas. If you don't like what he's saying, come up with some better whatever to say, come up with some better ideas.
It's an equal protection thing in my mind. If it's anything that's related to the government and they're giving some people the opportunity to speak and not others, it's a 14th Amendment equal protection thing.
Well, you can, yeah, but I try to relate things back to the principles involved. What's the guiding For me, freedom is based on property. That's why you have freedom of speech, because of property, not some constitutional provision. I love the Constitution, but that's not why we're free. That's not the basis of our freedoms. It's not the principles of our freedom. It just somewhat guarantees our freedoms under our current government, is how I perceive it. The reason we have freedom of speech is because I can talk as much as I want in this room, because Ken owns this room and he's letting me talk. You know, the reason I can't yell fire in a theater, and this is kind of what Walter Block talks about in Defending the Undefendable. Oh, what about the guy who yells fire in a theater? Well, his ticket to go into the theater didn't authorize him, didn't give him permission to yell fire. You know, that's a violation of his contract to be in that theater. So that's why he can't yell fire in a theater.
Wait, you know where that term originates from, though, right? One of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever.
Yeah, totally right. Justice Brandeis.
Basically, any anti-war protesters were being rounded up and deported.
Right.
And their justification was yelling fire in the theater.
Yeah, right. So I highly recommend Defending the Undefendable. He relates everything back to what is the basis of the freedom here. Anyway, don't get caught in the weeds. I stopped watching all the arguing on the cable TV shows years ago, and I feel much better about things these days. And I was on Think Tech Hawaii a few months ago, where they were interviewing me about an article I had written for Grassroot Institute of Hawaii about the rail fiasco. And at the end, Tim Apicella, he's a real nice guy, he got up and he said, "Oh, we got to go out and do our man on the street interview right now. Would you like to be on that?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. What do you want to ask?" And he said, "Well, they found out that Trump's son-in-law said something, and this is really it, man. He's going down," or something like that. You know, this is a big scandal. And I said, "No, it's not. You know, it's just like, this is just fleeting. Don't get caught up in the weeds." And especially when there's these big things like a shooting, or just don't even tune in for the first few days, because it's not what's going to be going on several days hence. You know, it's the information changes. And anyway, be nice, choose your words carefully. We are winning. I would also like to say, be prepared, work on your own self as far as educating yourself and your own skills. Work to be good at what you do, so that regardless of politics, you can support yourself. Think about like Boy Scout thinking, be prepared, and that might include self-defense. That's what we have a Second Amendment for. It's your right to defend yourself. It's not going to help if the police come knocking on your door at midnight or banging down your door at midnight, but you know, there might be a time when it'll be useful to have around. And just generally be a good citizen as much as you can. Obey all the laws that you have to without getting in trouble. And be nice. That's what I say. And we are winning. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't put them all in a political party. Don't put them all in a think tank. Don't put them all in anything. Stay flexible.
Yeah, they're on Defending.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot.
Perfect example of that. Ron Prey used to do a radio show in the early 1990s. If you remember Ron Prey.
Yeah.
I used to be his permanent sidekick for a couple of years.
Uh-huh.
And he would start the show with the most outrageous proposition you ever heard. He would say something that was just totally undefendable. In 2 hours, and people would call in screaming at him. Within 2 hours, he had everyone convinced that his original statement was exactly right.
He probably read Defending the Undefendable. I remember
even I was like, "Oh no, don't say that. Right? But by the end of the show, and this guy couldn't afford a hamburger on the outside, but when you put him in front of a microphone, he was brilliant.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So, a dilemma I have, speaking with friends, some are libertarian, well, let's say I'm a libertarian, and then on the other side there's a conservative and a progressive liberal. And I've kind of come to the conclusion, right or wrong, that you can't convince them of something, of your way of thinking, because their minds work differently. If you look at the same set of information, facts or non-facts, whatever it is, you'll reach a different conclusion. How do you deal with that?
Well, that comes up a lot for me with my friends on Facebook. I'm a musician, and most of my friends are actually, for various reasons, most of my friends seem to be not libertarians, and often progressives, quote unquote, or left-wing liberals, or whatever you want to use the term. I pretty much don't get involved with arguing with them because, for that very reason, I try to keep it on a personal level. I know that they know what my convictions are, generally speaking, on a lot of issues. And if I feel like I have to say something, I will. But I don't like to get pulled into a rabbit hole. And especially online, it's very fruitless. Then other people jump in, and you don't even know who they are sometimes, and they're arguing about whatever, and it's like, what are their premises? What do they mean by that term? So I just have really, for a long time, partly because of my journalism background, I think, I've not tried to avoid engaging in long, drawn-out, useless political arguments, knowing that we're winning anyway, because as a practical reality, our ideas are prevailing. Look, I remember the times before McDonald versus Chicago, I think it was, and Heller versus DC, when we were just always talking about defending our right to the Second Amendment. Now it should be a Second Amendment protected right. And now it is. And now the argument for those guys has shifted to bumper stocks or whatever, they can't even argue it. Now they're saying just get rid of the Second Amendment altogether. That's their real only hope at this point. And we won because we had the facts on our side. We won because it's morally right that people have the right to defend themselves. So they can rant and rave all they want, and some of them can get downright mean about it, especially on Facebook. People seem to, or online, people seem to go crazy with their emotions. But be nice, and this is another thing I'd like to urge: avoid sarcasm online. And it's probably a good idea to avoid sarcasm anyway, but except maybe among your friends. But it can be interpreted so wrongly that they don't know if you're being serious or joking, and so don't give them the opportunity to have to wonder about it. Just don't be sarcastic.
Emil, what's your thought on this?
How do I stay nice? I know that the socialism has a bad ending. It slowly turns people towards that get something for nothing.
Yes.
It's addictive.
Yes.
If you're nice,
yes,
it looks like you go along,
yes,
and then eventually they become majority and they start to vote their own, who provide what they provide the best, which is the freebies, and then eventually we run out of other people's money, and then we are all poor and we have nothing.
Greece.
In that.
I agree. I know that's the depressing part about what we see all around us all the time these days, and you do have to worry that it seems like every society has its own little version of going down the road so far that it reaches a point where you could almost go totalitarian.
Serfdom. I brought that book. We are on the road to serfdom.
The road to serfdom, and that is exactly why the bad people rise to the top. People like stuff for nothing, and the policies. But on the other hand, we're not alone in the world anymore. There's a lot of competition. People can vote with their feet. They can vote. There are even pockets in America that aren't the same as Hawaii. You could go somewhere else in America and it'd be a lot different. There's still a lot of problems. I know it's very easy to be depressed. Personally, I don't think it'll get that bad, even though sometimes it looks like an outright police state. Going to the airport, for example, in border patrol inspection stations that are 100 miles inland from the borders, down in Arizona and places like that, and up in Canada, northern U.S.
You gotta keep the Canadians out, though.
Canadian club can come in.
And when I was in FSU, there was we had a demonstration. Our group, it was at lunch hour, and there was a big stage, and me and my buddies, we got up, and a friend of mine had gone to Russia, I think, and come back with a big communist flag, which I wish I still had. It was a real actual communist flag. It was really big and red, and with the stickling hammer, it was really cool. But I was still pretty much in my anti-communist mode back then, and of course I'm anti-communist in terms of like a Soviet state kind of a thing. But we commemorated the Hungarian Revolution. We got up on stage and we were saying, "This is the anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution." I think it was like 58. It must have been, I don't know, 15 years or something, or 20 years.
56,
And we cut the thing into, said, now this, we cut the flag with scissors into pieces, and we said, "This is Romania, and this is Hungary. We want to see this all broken up again." And of course that did happen, you know. So I totally understand what you're saying, and I fear for that too. But I hope that the counter trends of, like I said, the internet, the fact that it just doesn't work. They already got rid of Obamacare, essentially. You know, it's that didn't work. There's so many things here locally that are probably going to fall under their own weight eventually. That's all you can hope for. It might not happen in our lifetimes, but I really think that in the end, we'll never have a pure libertarian society because these ideas never seem to go away. People, it seems like forever will always want to control our lives in some way, whether it's called socialism or communitarianism or progressivism or whatever you want to call it.
They will, you know, exactly. They will wrap it in some new terminology.
Right. Every year, you know, it's like now it's environmentalism. It used to be, you know, that people could say, "Oh, well, you know, if you're at the dinner table and you're all arguing about politics, well, you can talk about the weather." Or, you know, you can't talk about God or politics, but you can always talk about the weather. And everybody, "Oh, hey, it's pretty bad out there today, huh?" And now it's like turns into a political discussion.
Josh, you had your hand up, and then Tracy, is your hand up?
No, I'm scratching my head.
Oh, okay. Then Josh. Yeah.
Pretty good. A couple questions. First, you mentioned that like a lot of small successes, small but significant, like freedom-oriented successes we've had, even legislatively on the federal level. I know you say don't put your eggs in one basket, but if you could go back and pick one route among the two, would you have picked fighting in the Libertarian Party or in another party?
I would rather spin my wheels in the Libertarian Party just for my own self-satisfaction.
Let's say, but speaking
practically?
Practically.
Well,
what do you think would have made a bigger difference?
Well, in Hawaii, anybody can probably go in there right now and take over the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And that's why I think in Hawaii, the Libertarians actually have a pretty good chance right now of becoming the alternative major party. It's laughable what's going on with the Republican Party right now. My father was successful in taking over the Republican Party in 1964 in Hawaii. They took over the party in terms of capturing all the precinct captains, in majority, I guess. And I have a great article about how that all happened. And going to the Cow Palace in San Francisco and casting our vote for Goldwater, who lost. You know, so what did that achieve? Well, and the Republican Party ever since then in Hawaii is just been, going downhill. It hasn't really achieved much. I can't think of any real achievements.
The name, which is the bad brand now, because historically.
That's a good point. In Hawaii, it's definitely a bad brand. It's a bad brand.
Why do we want to revitalize it? So I mean, either it's going to be Libertarian Party, or I was trying to start American Party.
Oh, with George Barris?
Yes.
Well, good luck getting on the ballot.
It's 700 signatures. It's
Yeah.
too far, but
Yeah.
at the same time, is it even way to steer the change?
I think if you're a libertarian or for the free market, I think your best bet is the Libertarian Party. Especially on the mainland in certain areas, it's doing quite well. People are switching parties to join the Libertarian Party on the mainland. Here, this is Hawaii. I wrote an article for the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii a few months ago called "The Democrats Are Winning Because People Agree with Them." It's hard to get our ideas out there in a sufficient fashion that it will carry into the political realm. But for myself, especially working with now with the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. I don't really care if it's the Republicans or the Democrats or the Libertarians. I just want who's ever in the legislature to adopt our ideas. A good example would be firearms. There's a lot of Democrats there, and though we already have some of the strictest firearm laws in Hawaii, they could be a lot worse considering it's a one-party state dominated by Democrats. But it's not, because a lot of those guys are pretty good on the issue of guns. Now, why is that? Well, there's factions, so you got to pick your allies.
Larry, behind you, he's got a hand up and has something to interject here.
Yeah. Larry, did you have a question?
Oh, I thought he said something. Oh, yeah, no, yeah. A lot of issues, yeah. The Republican Party here is dead. A few years ago when Ron Paul was running, and they opened up for the local ballots, first time in decades or whatever. I signed up for the Republican Party. I went down to, I think, some school in Kailua to cast my ballot for Ron Paul. I walked in there and I said, call an ambulance, because about half these people are going to die within the next month or week. Everybody there was old white haoles, gray-haired, hardly a young person in the crowd. I mean, this party in Hawaii is gone. And I because I signed up, I get their emails. Every day I get an email from the Republican Party. There's this incredible infighting.
I do too. There is incredible infighting.
There's no.
They're not all haoles, by the way. I mean, if you look at it.
At this particular meeting, they were.
Kailua.
You're exactly right, but I mean, they're dead.
But it is a dead party, I think. And no offense against anybody who's sincere and well-meaning. I mean, they basically, I suspect, are. In fact, Fritz Rothing used to come to our Libertarian Party of Hawaii meetings in the early days. I thought he was a libertarian.
But I finished that. The upside of that is, and now I know several legislators doing work I've been doing the last few years. The Democratic Party is split into factions, and the neat thing about that is they don't have party lines anymore.
Right.
So they're issue-oriented lines.
Right.
So you have really more discussion, more debate, although most of it's not in public. I mean, they do it.
That's exactly my point.
They do it in caucus.
Right.
But the point is, they argue amongst themselves, and you probably have more influence at adjusting or changing the minds of some Democratic legislators than you do in trying to get into the aisle, this aisle versus that.
God bless the Republican Party members and the officials. I know some of them, and they're real sweet and well-meaning. And so, but what you said is so true, and it's almost like the beginning of the country where before political parties, it was factions.
Yeah.
And
personality and ego.
And that's fine. That's good. That means
we have an opening.
We have an opening. I agree.
Right.
So
this maybe is in Ken's realm, but see, to me, a lot of there's this whole thing about are the liberals' minds different than the conservatives? Or there's also the argument, well, it's how you were brought up. You mentioned your parents' influence on you. I don't know if it was your parents or maybe that's the way your mind works out. I don't know, but certainly in the education system, the rap today is that it's very liberal. And so the kids, looking at the school my kids went to, 6th grade on, it was an independent Catholic school. It was liberal, and that's what they were taught. They were shown Al Gore's movie, and they were told that was science. And I'm thinking, well, education at that lower level may have some influence.
Well, I was exposed to that too here in Hawaii, and I turned out fine. I was always, and the same thing in college. The college courses that I took were very liberal, and I'd go home and read what I had acquired on my own to understand why what I read in school was wrong. And so this is what I'm saying about going back to that too. The only way you're going to make headway with legislators of whatever party is by educating yourself so that you know really what you're talking about. Yeah. And even if you don't go trying to proselytize, you're still going to feel really good about the fact that as you look around the world and everyone's running around with their heads cut off, you know what's going on. You still got your head on you.
The best thing that ever happened to education is John Stossel in the classroom. I mean, I use it in all my classes. And
I know Stossel, but I don't know what Stossel in the classroom is.
It's all of his works has been adapted to classroom materials that teachers across the country
Oh.
will be using in high school, but I use it in my university classes. The students, they love it, and then it's the counterpoint to almost everything they get in all the other classes.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's dynamite, and now he's working for Reason TV. You can find all of his stuff online. Highly recommend.
So I try to take the long view philosophically. You know, things in the short run might look kind of dire, but in the long run, I think, especially if you take care of yourself. Students of Liberty, the point of that book was the best way to be a good teacher is to be a good student. And I believe that so much, that you must educate yourselves, whatever your specialty of interest is, you know, generally, and in terms of specialties, just be good at it, understand it. If you have questions, keep reading.
Yeah, Tracy?
Just to comment on the thing about the Republican Party. From time to time, we have people who feel the best thing we should do is try to take over the Republican Party, particularly some of the Ron Paul people. And my comment is, what do you want it for? And two, you're going to spend an awful lot of time and energy fighting with people in the Republican Party about taking over that party instead of building our work and trying to convince Democrats to come over to our side, which is a much more, to me, profitable use of our time.
Well,
Unless we had a libertarian Trump who could just destroy all the Republicans.
Please don't toss a libertarian.
Yeah, you just make
Well, wouldn't it be nice though? And you know who apparently has his ear these days is Rand Paul. So you never know how the world's going to go. I mean, that turned out to be, if that's true, that's pretty awesome.
Rand Paul has Trump's ear.
Yes, that's the news.
Well, he legalized buying insurance through state lines, which should have been done.
Yeah.
But you know, Rand Paul is very principled. He's his father's son, and he's taking more the Kali'i Akina role, you know, of being more accommodating with everybody. But he's keeping the long. He knows his principles, and he's keeping the long view in perspective.
Right.
Not that I am sure he's 100%
Coleman,
on.
I 100% agree with you. That is the best thing we can do, is to build our own party, to be friendly to people. If we encounter people like the one you're talking about who just won't listen, move on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Find enough people
bait.
who are open to our ideas, and then you outvote those people.
Right.
Some people you just have to get a democracy and get more votes, because they'll never come along.
Josh?
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to ask one last thing. The second question. I sympathize with what you were saying here. I think particularly for younger people, and tell me how you feel about this, I think that there are some people, especially when they're younger and their minds are more open and vulnerable, that there are certain people that need to be figuratively slapped in the face. And you really do have to debate them in a very assertive fashion and even be rude to an extent. Otherwise, these types of people would never convert. They wouldn't listen to you. Myself would be one of them. And so I wonder, do you think that there is a time and place for a more assertive approach
Good cop, bad cop?
convincing people?
Instead of being nice.
Well, I don't even mean good cop, bad cop. I mean, there are some people that are, just straight up confrontational, because it's the only way you're going to get through these people's minds. Particularly young people, that if you don't catch them while they're young, their mind is not going to change ever.
I don't
just
know.
Make them feel.
That's not my.
Make them feel stupid enough.
That wouldn't be my option. I've had a lot of confrontational arguments with a lot of people through the years, and my thinking is that it doesn't work very well.
Right.
You know, I was on the editorial staff of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser for the last 6-7 years, and I was generally outvoted for most of the discussions about what should we say about, you know, contemporary political issues. But because of the way I handle myself and the educational and the knowledge that I brought to the conversations, I was taken very seriously, almost always, and they usually integrated what I was saying into what ultimately would become the editorial, because it made sense, you know. And so I felt like I was having a moderating influence, you know, on what could have been a lot worse. And if I hadn't been there, but it would have been really easy to argue my way out of that department, you know, by being you know, real confrontational.
I'd like to suggest too that you might don't necessarily write off the left wing. The most radical free market reforms in the 20th century came in New Zealand by the Labour Party, the socialists of New Zealand. And they were following the Hayek model. But I talked with Richard Preble, who was the co-founder of the party, the leadership of the radical changes, and I asked him, "You're a socialist. I don't normally associate these radical free market reforms with socialism." He says, "Well, as a socialist, I always was against privilege, and I came to realize that every governmental program was a privilege to some at the expense of the many.
Awesome.
And that's why he went against it."
Right.
So I think you can even find some alliances, essentially, with good thinking people on the left who are well intended. I mean, there have been
That's what I mean.
The libertarian left, actually.
Right.
Many of them came over to the Libertarian
It's about
Party from
terminology,
that
because what they'll end up talking about is they're essentially, when they're talking about capitalism, they're really talking about crony capitalism, which is almost the same thing as state socialism to some extent. So it's just a matter of choosing your words correctly and demonstrating that these policies they are advocating are conferring privilege on unworthy, interest groups. Nobody deserves special privilege. And that's what a lot of these laws, like the Jones Act, and so on, are conferring, and they should be our allies fighting those kinds of things if they really care about equity and equality and helping the poor and this. You hear a lot about the middle class these days. Some fixation on the middle class.
What's with that?
I know. That's what I say. What's with that? And I think we should all be just worrying about individuals and our prosperity and our freedom. By the way, I'll plug for myself.
That question, because what is with that?
I think it's a kind of that's part of the socialist thing that they're trying to. They haven't quite kicked it off yet. They haven't,
I know what happened.
They're still using that Marxist language.
It used to be the party of the middle class, and then Obama and Hillary. When Obama took power, he totally trashed the middle class.
But we're talking about what is the middle class, and what the middle class is labor unions, people who are making a good living, what they call a living wage. It's this group of people kind of in the middle, a lot of whom are, like protected jobs for various reasons. But
they don't identify that way. Everybody now identifies in the middle class. Even the poorest people identify as the lower middle class or upper middle class. Nobody's out there calling themselves the wealthy or the poor. So I'm talking about the way people identify themselves.
Actually, I'd really like to incorporate some of the people who have raised their hand and they'd like to say something. You had your hands up, so if you would just make your comment here while we're at the tail end, and then Mark can respond to you. But make them first in succession here, and then Mark can reply to you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm new to a lot of these ideas, so I'm asking entirely out of ignorance. I was under the impression that things like capitalism, socialism, these are like markets, economies. These are economic policies. These are not necessarily like governance policies. So where is the line, I guess, between when you talk about Democrat, Republican, like actual governing policies and economic policies? Where's the separation there, or is there none? What is the libertarian stance, or where does that fall? Are we talking about one or the other, or is it both somehow?
Well, that's a good point in that Republicans and Democrats and even Libertarian Party, those are political parties, and theoretically they each abide by certain principles, and theoretically those principles relate to what they think about economic principles, like socialism or quote capitalism. So I guess it just depends what Democrat or Republican you're talking to, what they think, and what you got to look at their policies. And as far as socialism and capitalism goes, to me. I've been talking to Joe about this, but I think everything is capitalism. I think we're going to get past this era where we break it down into socialism, capitalism, and so on, because capitalism is just too broad. It means capital. Who owns capital? The whole world is capital, right? A socialist system is a system in which they're talking about who owns and manipulates the use of the capital. So even a socialist system is a capitalist system because they are working with capital. So then it's a question of, well, then you got to start answering the questions. Well, who owns the capital? Who owns the land? Who owns? Because everybody can't own it. You know, that's theoretically in a socialist society. It's supposedly either it's either the state. You know. Now, my view about you can have communalism or you can have socialism in a totally free market economy. You can have any sort of a system of exchange and you know, economics that you want, as long as it's on your own private property or on a big land in a big place where it's privately owned. You know, like a commune. You want to be a communist? Go buy a bunch of land and live like a communist. But you got to do it on your own private land. You know, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So I really think that we're all capitalists now, and it's just a question of, well, what kind of policies do we have to administer the capital of society, and I think having it all be privately owned is the most efficient and moral way to be efficient and protect our freedoms and let the human individuality flower, you know, as our personalities demand.
I was also just scratching my head, so I.
Oh, okay. Then Bill. Yeah. And actually, let's have Bill make the final comment, and then we're kind of have food here. The point is, please, if you don't eat it and take it home in your stomach, then you're also welcome to take it home with you in other ways, because I don't want any of it left here, okay? Lee will come back here and I want to pretend this didn't even happen.
We'll tell her. We'll tell her.
It's on camera.
Yeah, Bill?
My name is Philip, and typically...
Oh, Philip, I'm sorry.
Typically what I'm about to say gets heard by 2 ears or maybe at most 4. So this is quite a monumental. Dozens of ears are going to try to hear it, so bear with me a little bit. But we talk about privatization, we talk other terms. I'm wondering if it would be useful to find another flagship within this realm of gaining a power base. And the one I'm looking to is the commonalities that exist in the nonprofit organizations of Hawaii, which almost are at the level of what we call the government. They're, in terms of their economic influence, it's 50,000 employees paid. It's over $1 billion gross national or state national product addition to the state. And there's a whole mindset in that group of the sense of being right, the sense of doing good. So I'm wondering if it might be helpful for a libertarian or others when they're trying to find the flagship to actually not only be influencing on the policies of the Democrats, but actually find a rallying cry. And it would appear to me that, because I've had an occasion to work with so many of them, and there is a commonality there.
So what is that?
A very strong sense that they've broken the bonds and the boundaries of having a allocation of money produced by someone else, and that they can use the competition of ideas as the most and criteria of we are doing good is so much higher in their level of expectation of the people that are supporting them and the people that are volunteering and so forth. So the mechanisms that exist within that realm, I think, and because in this particular state has grown to such an economic force in the $1 billion, in the 50,000 employee level, that is a fertile field that hasn't been mobilized with the purpose of affecting a collective notion of government policy.
Well, honestly, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but I'll sort of offer this in case I did get it right. Grassroot Institute of Hawaii is a kind of nonprofit group that I like to work with. We're not receiving any government money, and especially in the absence of an effective in the absence of effective political parties, and no disrespect to libertarians, because I love the Libertarian Party of Hawaii, they're not happening at the moment in this state. Whereas I think the Grassroot Institute is making a big difference on a lot of levels. But the kind of
agreement with that, but what I'm saying.
Well, the nonprofits you're talking about, I think, are the ones that are getting government money, right, to do things.
Not necessarily. The YMCA, for example. I just attended a briefing on how, under various scenarios of disaster in the state, how all of a sudden the YMCA has a role under some of our policies for disaster relief, and how FEMA money will circulate to them and come out.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so, but what I'm saying is that there's engines of a lot of conscientious people.
Right.
That are very motivated to say, how am I going to be ready to be the best player in making the state work?
Well, my thoughts about the nonprofits undertaking tasks that otherwise the government wants to do. They're kind of subcontracting government work. They're kind of subcontracting out things that the government thinks that needs to be done, but then they go out and they get a nonprofit to do it. Sometimes there's bidding, sometimes there's not. To get the cheapest rate or whatever. It's a form of privatization of government operations, but that doesn't make it right. I don't know. It'd have to be case by case.
I'm not at all saying it's right. What I am saying is an effective new champion. It's like going with another flag that has a better chance than the Republican Party will have.
Well, you're one person, I'm one person. That might work for you. You pick something you like and go with it. It's hard to say we're going to take over all these groups and.
No, we can infiltrate them.
I'm sorry, I do better with the 4 years.
Well, sorry if I didn't get it.
And since that was the last one, I would definitely like us all to join in with a big applause for Ken for this.
Okay, Dave had a comment that he's going to make, and then everybody please break and come up and have some more food. Okay, and I want to thank Mark Coleman for putting this on to give his presentation and for being a good, hearty libertarian from inside the journalistic world as well as in the grassroots putting it all together. So thank you very much.